is Bean to Barstool, a podcast that looks at the intersections of craft beer and craft chocolate. My name is David Nilsson. I'm a professional beer writer and an advanced cicerone, and the creator and host of this show. The music for this episode is by my dear friend, indie folk musician Anna P.S. You can find out more about Anna's music in the show notes or at her website, annapsmusic.com. You can find links and information about our guests in the show notes as well. I hope you enjoy this episode of Bean to Barstool. I grew up in a fundamentalist religion, and when I left as a young adult, it felt like I'd lost some invisible but essential internal organ. You don't lose belief all at once. It goes in pieces, and what it leaves behind is a patchwork of religious vocabulary and existential fear, held together by an interstitial tissue of spiritual expectation that will never again be satisfied. I left behind belief a long time ago, but the language and imagery of the religion of my childhood still informs my speech, my writing, my way of framing questions and explanations. My dad was an itinerant preacher, always in search of a church to hire him. The search never really ended. It just wayfared longer in some forgotten corn and coal towns than others. I spent my first 6 years in a rundown trailer park in northern Indiana, and many weekends would see us loading into a puke yellow camper van that was always spitting up some small but critical part, a fuel pump, a fan belt, and crisscrossing the eastern half of the country. Corning, New York, Mount Morris, Michigan, Port St. Lucie, Florida. Like military brats, a preacher's kids learn to make friends quickly and to lose them again without a thought. The wind stirs the branches in the grown-up world, and suddenly the kids are packing up their rooms again, looking up a new town name in a Rand McNally road atlas, wondering if it'll have a Dairy Queen. My sister, Shan, and I were each other's witnesses through these years. Put us together with something good to drink, and by the end of the night, the conversation will turn to excavating our strange childhoods and their echoes across the plains of our adult lives. We've both left religion behind, and both coped with the vacuum it leaves in its wake as best we can. As I fell in love with craft beer in my 20s, and eventually bean to bar chocolate in my 30s, and as I grew in my proficiency as a home cook, I noticed something curious happening. The role faith had once played in my young life of pushing me to explore my identity and experiences, contemplate my world, and experience wonder and connection to something bigger than myself was now transferring more and more to my senses. The quest for the eternal had become a celebration of the ephemeral. I'm not going to say something silly and hyperbolic like beer and chocolate are my religion now, but these indulgent sensory experiences do scratch some itch to connect with an experience outside myself, something that can be shared between people of varied backgrounds and experiences. There is ritual and calm and centering that goes into the tasting experience. It's something to hold on to. My sister, Shan, lives in Asheville, North Carolina, with her husband, Nick. She's a few months shy of being 7 years older than I am, and while that age spread would lead to distance between many siblings, our unique upbringing meant we were very close throughout my childhood. Shan is an artist, and last year for Christmas she sent me a curious gift. Inside a wooden cigar box were thin wooden ornaments with vintage dictionary entries glazed onto them, each a different spice or botanical. Ginger, nutmeg, cinnamon, cedar, coffee, cacao. We hadn't talked about this, and she sent no explanation, but I understood immediately. This was her recognizing the sensory as sacred, and allowing for a new ritual to adorn a holiday that had long ago lost its central tenet for me. I've talked often about how flavors and smells can evoke memory, emotion, and imagination. In that way, specific foods and drinks can become talismans, religious icons to draw us into a deeper process our daily lives can often bar us from. I've had more late nights talking to my sister over good food and drink than I can remember. These ornaments, as abstract as they are monuments to those moments. Today's episode is a break from our normal format. We're not going to talk about any specific beers or chocolates, or about those two fields specifically much at all. We're going to talk with Shan about the experience of interacting with flavor, how we both approach that, what it satisfies for each of us, and how that experience is informed by our childhoods. It's unedited and follows its own course. Listen in on this candid, vulnerable conversation, and I think you'll understand more of what this project of mine is all about. So I usually approach these interviews with an outline and lots of clearly planned questions, and I just don't really have any.
That's
So
fantastic.
it's just for I figured we'd just bullshit on this and see what comes of it. So
Yeah. And if we get done and you're like, you know what, that was an hour of genuine bullshit, but we will just record something again this weekend or next week. It's perfectly fine.
works for me. So the basic idea that I sent you is just what I want to go around, just the idea of moving out of a faith upbringing and how that has been replaced with other rituals, other aspects of community, and for me specifically looking at flavor and artisan food and drink for that. But we can look at if that has been the case for you, or if that's art, if that's something else.
Yeah.
With that, I was also looking, and this is something that I've seen some other food and drink writers comment on, is growing up in poverty or relative poverty and then discovering the world through those
Yeah.
products rather than just having grown up in it and having a foundation with that. So
For sure. I think
all of
that's
that.
very prevalent in my life story, both food story and sort of personal evolution in adulthood. That piece is a little bit separate for me from the original piece around leaving a more ritualized faith-based life, and how you look for a sense of the pieces that make life still feel familiar, right? After that. So I think those are two separate things for me. Obviously they're all intertwined, but but it's very intriguing you say that poverty piece, or lacking things and exposure to things comes up so much even now. 45, right? I'm still getting these interesting, oh, everybody already knows that, and I just discovered it, like it's a fantastic new invention, both in the positive and negative ways, but also in it's just been happening all along in the sense of my personal evolution of choices I've made really intentionally around that space. So I think we talk about both, right? But I think for me, they kind of, while they meet in the middle, they're not quite as integrated, maybe.
Yeah, you brought up, I feel like just in the last year or so, that since being with Nick, you feel like you've been exposed to new flavors, new food groups, whether it's different ethnic cuisines or whatever it is.
Right.
Do you want to dive into that a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. So he grew up in Southern California and has lived in places like Boston, Toronto, etc. So his career has involved travel, which means he's eaten out a lot, and also eaten in the sense of with other business people, which tends to lend itself to a certain type of exploration versus, I grabbed some McDonald's on the way to a hotel room type of eating out.
Right.
So yeah, in the last few years, two things have happened at the same time, and obviously they're related. So Nick, having that background and having a lot of exposure to things that are not Indiana and things that are not $5, right? Both of those two things in the food realms. And also, to be very frank, my job putting me in a place that maybe I can make a financial decision at the grocery store or at a restaurant that I wouldn't have been able to make at 20 or 25 has happened at the same time, which has been, frankly, a lot of fun because that type of freedom to be in a relationship with somebody that doesn't look at you like, how do you not already know this? And or doesn't treat you like a petri dish of explore, like, let me condescendingly introduce you to these things you don't know, but is just happy to share their knowledge and say, hey, let's grab this food and give you, some exposure has been a lot of fun. In that space, a lot of different restaurant types and cultural backgrounds keeps popping up. So I didn't even know, I would have thought of Indian food, and I'm using finger quote marks here, around as one thing that I had maybe had once or twice. I think of some really specific flavor profiles that I knew to be associated with that. and a very limited amount. So that's something that's one of his favorite like comfort foods outside of the Mexican food that he grew up with. That is a very specific treat to him. Where I think maybe for me growing up, that was more in the Asian line. That was a comfort treat food to me because of our background. So going into real ethnic restaurants run by folks that are Indian by heritage and descent, but also are not Americanizing a ton of, let me give you the first, kind of walk through cafeteria style of that food, was mind-blowing. Flavors that I don't think I like. For example, I'm not a big fan of heat for heat's sake, even though I like Mexican and Asian, those types of foods that have heat. It's not really one of my favorite profiles there, but something about the way that I've been exposed to some dishes that pair that with sweet just blew my mind. I never have had experience growing up those two thoughts together, a sweetness and a heat of any type. I thought of heat as a savory. So if you think of like a salsa, right? Very basic,
Right. Yeah.
how I associated that. So some of those explorations have been genuinely delightful. When the bite that you put in your mouth by itself, even just the individual bite, is a flavor profile you never even considered existed together like that, sweet and heat. It's been a lot of fun.
You mentioned a little bit earlier that the feeling of having an experience like that and then realizing that like, oh, some other people have already known about this, have already discovered it. I feel like you and I approach that differently because I feel an immediate self-consciousness of like, I need to know about this before I go into that conversation. And you seem to have a very open, like a lack of
I've never
pretense.
tasted this before.
Right. Yeah. Like you're free to have that discovery in the presence of people. And I feel like I have a need to protect that discovery. Like I'm going to get exposed if I, have that in front of somebody.
We'll be right back.
Hey everyone, Final Gravity Issue 5 is now available in the shop on beantobarstool.com. This 5th issue of our zine telling personal, human-centered stories from the world of beer is full of great articles. Bano Segudu tells the story of the South African beer style Umkombothi, poignantly explaining its role in her culture and the importance in her family's celebrations and milestones. Maria Krugliak writes about discovering the Portuguese half-pint after moving to Portugal during the COVID-19 pandemic. Amanda Bruns and Obakeng Malope discuss the water spirit Mamuhaswa and the collaboration beer they brewed in her honor. These and numerous other stories fill the 56 pages of this zine. We've expanded it and added a few features for this issue. It's full color, full of lots of beautiful photography and art. Definitely check this out. It's on beantobarstool.com/shop. You can purchase this issue or subscribe, and you can always support us on Patreon and get extra perks as well. Cheers.
Yeah, that makes sense to me. I hadn't thought of it in those terms specifically, but you're right. I think we are both different in those ways in other categories though, right? I mean, I think that's probably not dissimilar to how we maybe are. You're a little bit more guarded in general around the idea of being exposed. That's my words, not yours, clearly, but around that perception, that's my perception. You're more guarded around letting people see anything that isn't curated. You're working to make sure that you're being self-contained, and that has benefits, certainly. There are downsides for me on the other side, because I think I live a lot of my life choosing, and in some ways defaulting, maybe is a better word in some cases, to I'm going to put it all out there and then we'll figure out what we're going to do with it. It makes me feel a little less anxious, to be very frank, to not have to worry about other people thinking I care what they think in all categories. So I would rather be the one that gets to own the exposure of my lack of knowledge in something. I'm telling you right now. And so I'm just, letting it fly, and I'm eating this and telling you what I like and saying, that was weird. And I don't understand. Why is this, different than X or Y? But I think it's more about control for both of us. So we just do it in different ways.
Yeah. I think it's interesting, and I'm always kind of at odds with myself on that inclination, because if you reverse those positions, when I'm in the position of being the one who is more knowledgeable, I never want to make people feel that way. And
Yeah.
I'm very intentionally, especially with doing beer education events, I'm often in the position of a person having their first experience with a given flavor. And
Totally.
I very much want them to have the freedom to have that experience and to be open about it and to be excited and to be surprised. And nobody likes that, oh my God, you haven't heard of whatever person. Like, nobody
Right.
likes that person.
No.
But for
That
whatever
guy.
reason, like, I'm constantly feeling like I'm in projected fear of that person. Like, I never want to expose myself to that person, even though I don't feel like I run across them very
But
much.
here's the thing. I guess what I'm trying to say is I'm also in fear of that person, and we're just choosing to mitigate it in different ways. You're mitigating it by keeping the experience private so that by the time you join the conversation, it's not something you have to worry about. I'm mitigating it by saying, you're not going to get to call me on that and say, oh, bless your heart, you didn't know about this. I'm going to say, this is crazy. I didn't even know this existed. And that way it takes away any fire of condescension, in my mind, at least. So
That makes sense.
have the same fear, and we're just carefully curating how we figure out how to navigate people not having that. I think that goes back to, don't you though, the fact that the similarity in the lack of exposure monetarily to food options growing up, right? I think we probably both have that. We know we came to this game late. I assume, I don't want to put that on you, but I assume most people came to the game earlier. Frankly, that's not always the case, right? There's plenty of us out there, but I assume everybody already knows the things I'm now discovering. So I think it goes back to that piece of believing that because childhood was maybe lacking in funds and therefore food variety based on that, that it makes us feel a little, I don't know if I want to say defensive, but protective of that place, because it comes from a place of want, of knowing of not having.
Yeah. Last year, I interviewed the poet Emily O'Neill, who similarly grew up with little money and then went into working in fine dining establishments and doing barkeeping, like upscale barkeeping and stuff. And she was talking about the same thing of like now being in a place in life where she both has money and exposure and knowledge now to these foods and drinks, and how we were discussing how we both constantly feel like we're going to get caught. Like at some point the gig is up. Like at some point, like the cops are going to come in when we're in that experience and be like, hey,
that guy is finally going to say proof.
He doesn't belong here. Pulled it off for a while.
It's the foodie version of that 8 Mile scene where the guy's like, you go to private school.
Yes.
Called out for being the not vision of what you were trying to do. I completely feel that. Completely. I think it's part of the reason, and I've talked to you about this a little bit in the sense of how I see you and Nick doing this. You control some of that around learning intentionally to be educated so that you're, like your friend Emily, right? You're able to have the conversation intelligently. Part of my avoidance of that is intentionally not studying it to be able to say, oh, this must be related in this way. I choose very largely, and this is probably pertinent to the rest of my personality as well, but I choose largely to keep it as an experience versus a knowledge that I gain, other than the knowledge of what I do and don't like, right? I don't say that as a better, like a good idea. It's just how I think I handle that. I don't want to be caught out in it.
So, I mean, you're saying you're choosing not to acquire information consciously for yourself.
Yeah, right. In the sense of how you and Nick, and this is something I was thinking about, I think we talked about this, before a little bit, of how you both approach, we'll just use food and drink as a topic, bringing in a new type of experience in the, now I'm going to learn about this. I'm choosing to understand kind of the differences in the origin, whether it's, Nick and cigars and bourbon, but even, for him, it's foods and wines as well. And I think of your beer education largely self-taught in the beginning, and then pursuing the rest of that education. And then obviously foods and such. And I think you both take that in stride as a, nobody's going to be able to call me out because I will genuinely learn it. I don't want to be called out. So I, A, tell everybody I haven't had this before and I don't know anything about it. And then B, even when I want to engage on it after the fact, so now I've had this and I want to say, oh my gosh, it was so good. That's what I say. Oh, I love that. Right. My terminology would be around experience versus knowledge, and therefore I'm not as concerned, is maybe the way I should say it, about gathering the knowledge, because I'm going to want to have the experience next time a little bit. I gather little pieces that are pertinent to my experience. An example, you and Melinda were the ones that first helped me isolate that I like wheat beers, right? That's what I like. I didn't know that. When I had them, I knew I liked them. And then I was disappointed the next time something was the same color, but tasted like bitter hoppiness, and it's not what I like. Like, why do I not get it's the same pale yellow color and it gives me not the same happy experience? So adding the word, to understand that, adding that, oh, I like sour, and so this Gosa style is something that I almost always like, adding little pieces like that inform my ability to enjoy the experience are really the extent of the knowledge that I seek or even retain.
We'll be right back.
Hey everyone, my book on pairing craft beer and craft chocolate is available now on Amazon and on the Bean to Barstool shop. Pairing Beer and Chocolate, a guide to bringing the flavors of craft beer and craft chocolate together, is out now. This paperback book explains the process of pairing beer and chocolate, includes a guide to hosting a pairing at home, walks through dozens of beer styles to provide style-by-style pairing guidance, and gives room for taking your own pairing notes along the way. This is the only book on pairing beer and chocolate available. Grab your copy now at the link in the show notes or on Amazon. If you manage a tap room, bookstore, chocolate shop, or cafe and want to stock the book, get in touch about our easy wholesale process. Beer and chocolate belong together, and this book is your guide to getting the most out of every pairing. You're an intelligent person. You're a person who likes reading. You like the act of learning, of self-education.
Yeah, for sure.
Are there areas where you feel like that does not apply, like that dynamic you're describing, where you do want to be informed?
In life, yes. We're relevant to food and things that I enjoy because of the experience. I prefer them to be as pure experience as possible relative to, individual things. If I have to help prepare and or pair something, I'm looking for some type of knowledge in my mental database around how to do that. But even so, I have people for that. I guess I probably approach that in a way of the knowledge that I need for a specific meal, choice at a meal, drink pairing, etc., is probably something that I don't mind, because I've already put out there the idea that I don't know, right? That I'm not well versed in these things. I don't mind asking, Nick ahead of time, if we're going to put together a little meal, like, is this something, I was thinking this kind of a wine. I don't know much about wines. I know brands that I've liked. I know types, right? But does this make sense to put with this? Yeah, you can do whatever you want, he'll say, yeah, but with that piece, maybe with the fish, we think this direction. Maybe with this, we go that direction. Even like, if I'm looking for something that tastes like this, I have people for that, right? Or I have Google in the spur of the moment to make the decision. And that you can joke, but that happens so many times at a restaurant. I'm looking at the menu. Maybe it's something Nick hasn't had before either. And I'm Googling, like, what is this particular spice flavor, or what is this particular thing, to get a better feel than what's on the menu if their description is aimed at people that already understand it, right? They're just giving a direction for this type of specific dish. And I'm like, yeah, I don't know what you're talking about. So I will literally Google and be like, oh, that totally sounds like something I like. I will try it. I don't.
Go ahead. Sorry.
Oh, no. I was just going to say, I think around the knowledge piece, there is definitely something. There is definitely something about that I like about making it experience versus much of an intellectual connection, or as much of an intellectual connection, for better or worse.
You mentioned description there, whether that's on a menu or on a wine label, on a beer label, whatever it is. That's something that's going to come up a lot for me in this podcast, is the way that we handle descriptive language around beer, and especially relative to fields like wine or fine chocolate, because aside from the specific descriptions, like the actual concrete flavor descriptions differing, the way that language is approached is different in those different fields. Beer tends to be extremely concrete. So if you get description, it is specific flavor descriptors that are going to be provided. Usually this has flavor of grapefruit zest and pine needles and like whatever else, but it's going to be very concrete. Yep. Whereas in wine and chocolate, often you'll find much more whimsical language, much more like romantic language, where it's painting a picture, trying to put you in a state of mind. There are pros and cons to both. And frankly, I think that most fields should employ both. You need to tell a consumer what a thing tastes like, and you also need to give them a reason to care why it tastes like that.
Yeah, I like that.
Coming from the direction that you're talking about of how you approach things just experientially, and maybe don't bring a lot of systematic knowledge into that, how do you feel about the way things get described? Do you prefer concrete descriptions that are going to tell you exactly what to look for, or do you prefer that painted picture that just kind of puts you in a frame of mind and then you get to be surprised?
I think you're right that what you said about we deserve both as consumers. I think that is exactly how I would have answered this, even if you hadn't said that. Pure bullshit, as in imagine yourself on a field in Italy, right? Like, is not really going to help me if it's whatever the thing is not the flavor I like, right? So I can picture myself there in the field in Italy, and then when I drink this, it's entirely possible I'm going to picture myself with a sour look on my face and annoyance, right? So I need somebody to tell me this is strong-bodied, or this is light and floral, or this is sweetness, or this is bitter, or this is, any kind of descriptor to point me in a direction that makes me understand, okay, I really wasn't looking for something to knock my socks off, or I really was not in the mood for sweet, or whatever that piece of it is. But then I love imagery, right? I get behind the feel of a brand, or of an object, or of a setting. So a little bit of both is super helpful. Last week, Nick surprised me, and we stopped at this winery just about 20 minutes down the road called Marked Tree. Apparently only been open for a short amount of time, but it was set on like 50 acres, rolling hills with vineyards, and for social distancing purposes, there's little canopies spread out throughout the hillside with Adirondack chairs, and it's just two people, so Nick and I in our own little pavilion, right, and just nothing else. They're bringing wine, cheese board, we're just sitting there enjoying the hummingbirds next to us, and that really helped me relax, because wine is one of those that still tends to make me a little nervous, just because I have had more exposure, usually through work, frankly, to people that have knowledge with a capital K, and don't mind explaining that. So I still have a little bit of that nervousness around it if I'm not just, in my own, bathtub with a glass of wine in a tumbler sitting next to me. If I'm out at all, I feel probably nervous about wine more than anything else. And that setting with somebody, the guy that was bringing us our tastings was really taking the time to to ask, which I found to be very intriguing way to start that process. So what do you taste? What do you think? With no preamble, not you're going to find this has these notes. He definitely shared that after the fact, in the sense of we get a lot of comments that this is what people, experience, or that we've heard a lot of good feedback about pairing it with these types of things. Hey, maybe try it with that specific cheese. But he started that with questions. What are you tasting? What's the first thing that comes to mind? And that relaxed my entire ability to take in then the things that he shared that were really the notes that they were, most commonly aware of in their tasting. So I think a little bit of both for me has got to take place. I need to feel invested with imagery or with, the sort of romanticism of it, but also I need some guidelines going in. If we're talking restaurant and I have to pick something, I need some kind of descripting words that, is it bitter? Is it strong? Is it savory? Is it sweet? Is it hot, right? Is there a heat here? I need something to point me in the right direction.
Sure, that makes sense. Let's switch over and talk about the faith upbringing then. Mm-hmm. With what I've described to you of how flavor and the tasting experience sits for me as kind of replacing not only some of the ritual, but also some of the just access to a deeper experience for me. Yeah. Do you share any of that? Do you feel like it sits in any of that place for you?
Yeah, I think the easiest way for me to think about that particular question, which I have this week thinking about this, is with regards to holidays, right? Because holidays were very, they were fun. So when I say, I'm getting ready to say traditional or tradition-based, I don't mean in a dry sort of rote way. I just mean I experienced our Christmas season, for example, growing up, obviously as a very religious experience, right? Religiously based reason for celebrating, but it was about the traditions of the things we did and the familiarity that went with the excitement of the flavors and the everything from flavors to the piece of our interactions with our faith at that point. So I find myself more and more even, I feel the need more and more to find ways to capture that feeling of tradition that lends itself to internal excitement and hope and introspection in ways that are challenging to find without the faith connection. And for me, those are all sense-based. They're not all food-based, but they're all sensory-based, right? They're lighting choices. And I know that sounds a little pretentious, but I just mean in this Christmas, I make sure that there are all forms of glowing light options in our house. Like that's how we're looking at everything. If you have an eye problem, you're probably not going to enjoy Christmas around here because there will be dim light and it will be of a yellow base. But then, the scents, so all the balsam pine registering smells, the cinnamons and the nutmegs and the baking smells, and then the food ones as well, right? So I want to make the things that traditionally we, or some part of my upbringing, whether that's with my kids or as a kid, I consider to be part of the Christmas tradition, or whether it's a treat in some way, in the sense of being able to treat the people that are with me to something, whether that's new or old, whether traditional or some new experience. But I completely agree with you that I find a lot of ability to connect myself in those types of times via sense-based experiences, not having, the faith-based emotional connection to those things at the same time.
I think for me, one of the reasons that food and drink has done this so specifically is that our our chemical senses, our sense of smell, our sense of taste, to a limited degree, our sense of touch as it interacts with food and drink, whether it's sensing heat or whatever, those are very closely aligned to our ability to process emotion and memory. So that they're very evocative of that. And when we left the faith, there were a couple different things we were losing. One was that tradition and that backward looking thing, that whether it's the religious events that we were believing in from biblical times, or just the modern tradition we were entering into that we had ritually done year after year. But then there was also that forward facing hope, the things that you were looking toward in the future, the expected redemption that was coming. And when you leave that, you can replace the past a lot easier than you can replace the future.
Oh,
And
yeah,
so
absolutely.
there's nothing I can do to change that. I don't believe somebody's showing up in a white horse from the sky, somewhere down the road to just wake us all up from this, nightmare and just, wash everything clean. I can't do anything about that going away, but I can do something to regenerate the feeling of the past and recreate ritual, tap into experiences that I had as a child and all of that. And so it feels like this slotted in to replace that, because there's nothing that could replace the other side of it.
Yeah, I do feel like on my part, that forward facing thing, absolutely, that resonates what you said, that there is no replacing. You cannot, for a faith that was very intentionally around, don't worry, it all works out in the end, it is very challenging to replace the lack of anxiety piece and or hope or all that can go with that. I absolutely, full stop. And I would say now I find myself trying to use what the past, the backwards looking piece of it, or maybe the in the moment current piece of it, to replace a little bit of that forward piece in this way. When I talked about giving, trying to create treats, I know that's a very childlike word, but to give good things, specifically food in this instance, to the people that I care about, I think it really, really lines up with me around the faith piece that we used to have, that was very strongly just front of consciousness my whole childhood for me, of my responsibility to bring those around me to the same final destination, right? My job is to bring people to goodness, a good end, let's say, right? Heaven, right? To God.
Right.
And so how that seems to translate now is that I still have some of that aching. I have plenty. Let me look at me, try to be cute and say I have some. I have this still prevalent aching need to do the things for the people that around me, the people that I really care about, especially, that will both give them goodness, give I impact the goodness that they find in their lives or in their memories. And also, let's be really honest, allay some of that guilt that goes with not being able to do that if you have that burden of trying to figure out how to replace it. And so I think around the things like holidays or around other experiences, my conscious need to create positive memories, we'll say, in the present. Certainly many of those are related to things in the past, but it's also a very forward-looking thing for me around how I balance out my need for hope and peace, in the sense that I am gifting those. That's what's happening in my mind, at least. I'm wanting to gift those goodnesses that fit my non-faith life to those people. So whether that is, look how I learned how to make this type of dessert that I do not study. I'm never gonna, I have no other French recipes I'm squirreling away to figure out how to do later. But I've learned how to do this one thing as a treat to create this positive memory for you, this small group that I love, that huddled around the, the table type of feeling, whether it's really food or not. But those types of things I think are how I'm trying to address the future part of it in my mind. I need to know next year. I need to know 10 years from now, as those in my small circle inevitably die. I need something. I'm banking on I'm banking on working on finding the peace out of this sensory piece that we're talking about for that future part too, that I will have that satisfaction in the hope and peace, maybe. So having the peace with it, that I really did everything I could for the time that I do have, since I no longer have an afterlife belief that I can impact. For the time I do have, that I did everything I could to gift solid interactions and memories being made in that time.
Yeah, I think I do that. I guess I hadn't thought about that. I hadn't thought about the role of that going forward, but I do that too.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And
sure.
and I also find that so much of what I do is evangelism still.
Mm-hmm.
Like I will find myself when I'm if I'm up in front of people teaching, the ways that I'm explaining things, just the patterns of speech and the ways that I know how to unpack a topic and whatever, I learned it from Bible studies and teaching Sunday school or whatever else. And like, I'll get really annoyed in my head as I'm doing it. It's like, I gotta just learn a completely new pattern of speech, but I can't.
You can't, right? It's effective.
Right, it works. It was great training.
In a faith world, right?
Best salesman in the world.
So, yeah, absolutely. I think that the same thing. I think I put the same type of inflection around even people in my inner circle, I would say, that are still faith-based. I try not to use their language because it feels disrespectful to me, right? So I'm not trying to use your same words literally to convey. So even things around hope and peace, I try to be careful about, right? I know we mean different things. I know I mean something different. So I'm trying not to sound patronizing, but the same ways that we go around it, in the sense of, like you're talking about, the rituals, the types of communication patterns, the types of emotional vulnerability that are intentional around some faith-based experiences. I try to at least somehow infuse those into these sensory, and gifting sort of experiences. So the same way, I get it, right? We are what we are.
Yeah. So another aspect of this is the loss of community. And when we look at coming together around food and drink, what else is a bar or a tap room or a restaurant than a community gathering place, and a place that you come together and share an experience? When I left the church, and Linda and I have talked about this often, I don't want to go back to it, but I do miss just the quality of people having your back, of like a group of people who you got together with them, didn't matter what else was different in your lives, like these were your people. Do you feel like you have replaced any of that with gathering in that way, or is that more just...
I think if I had to say a yes or no answer, I would say no. Obviously, there's a caveat. I would say there is some relief for me as an introvert, maybe a social introvert. I don't know. When I'm around people, I feel the burden of being responsible for them. So used to be faith-based. Now it has no real connection to what I'm supposed to be doing with them, but the burden to care for them and heal them in some way is no lessened. So I feel a great deal of relief of not having to have so many people I'm responsible for, that I don't have to carry the weight of. not that people were putting their weight on me intentionally, right? But that there are not people I have to every week physically be in the same place with the understanding that I should have their back on a deep emotional level is a tremendous relief of pressure off my shoulders, which very frankly to me, having said that out loud, sounds horrifying. It sounds so selfish and unkind, but the problem is that burden of I will care, like wander too close to my circumference, literally, physically, my space, and I will carry forward the fact that 3 days ago it was blistering hot outside. I was home at lunchtime. The mail guy dropped the package and our driveway comes all the way down and then back up some steps and up to the driveway, and he left that package and I got to the door and he was only to the driveway, and I probably could have gotten him some ice water and I didn't, and 3 days later I'm still conscious of that fact. So
Well, I
please,
think,
for the love of green, limit the number of people I have to carry those burdens for.
and I don't think it sounds selfish, because I mean, some of it is just your personality, but some of it I think is the unique way that girls are socialized in the church to be providers and caretakers.
There you go. I believe the phrase helpmeet is
Yes.
here. One of my most favorite indoctrinations. You will be weak, but you will be irreplaceable as a helpmeet. Very weak, all the weakness, however, much helpmeet. Struggle is real.
Indeed. So this Christmas or last Christmas, you sent me the ornaments that
Last
have
one,
the different,
yeah, just this last year.
Different spices on them, cinnamon and nutmeg. I don't remember what else. We hadn't really talked about this. Tell me a little bit about what went into that and what your thinking was at the time.
Yeah, you had dropped a line in one of your postcards to me. I had commented, and to be honest, I don't really remember exactly what I had said to you that prompted it, but I did share something around the space of, enjoying some type of food exploration, something around that. And you dropped a line in your reply that said something around, yeah, really, like that resonates, really finding that is a replacement for some of those, emptinesses from leading a faith-based life. I honestly don't think it was more than one sentence, but it stuck with me because it resonated so much that I hadn't really specifically articulated that to myself. Flavor and we'll say smell, maybe. So scent and taste intentionally being used in my life to replace the space left from leaving a faith-based existence. I had not connected those really, and it resonated. So when I was, starting to think about something I wanted to give you or something I could create to try to indicate I heard that and to try to share that connection with you in some simple way, it really just started happening. So those wood slats that I put those on were from cigar boxes that Nick had saved. They were the little filler pieces because he really liked those cigars, right? Those were scent and flavor experiences for him that he wasn't willing to give up, right? After the cigars were gone. And I found these pieces, and it was literally the first thing that as I was touching the wood, the tactile kind of I feel like I could make something for David with these. That was what came into my head. And, I like to work with some of these older, dictionaries and different ephemera pieces, and finding some of those little, even the font that is used in some of those old dictionaries that ended up with the little tiny drawings that are included there to show you what holly is, in case you're not sure what a holly is. I don't know. I love their simplicity and their sort of old world feel. And that was really my intention. I wanted to send you and Melinda both something that connected to that space in my head, and hoped that, they're simple, that they wouldn't, kind of make a statement about me, but more about just something we could share and enjoy.
Yeah. I think it was especially interesting to have that at Christmas, because Christmas is such a weird holiday for everybody to celebrate when we, at least we no longer believe in the religious root of this. And I don't think most people who actually celebrate it really have any direct religious connection beyond just the fact that they are abstractly Christian because they are white Americans or because
Sure.
they're whatever,
Yeah.
And so having, specifically because of the role that we're talking about, flavor replacing, of being a connection to something deeper, of being a piece of ritual, that then having that at Christmas when most of the rituals now are just purely, they're just hedonistic. Like they're not connected to anything I believe. I thought was, poignant and similar.
Yeah, it's interesting. I don't think I've ever told you this one specific piece. There is a holdout from faith-based music listening times, an Amy Grant Christmas album, which I think are kind of perennial anyway for everybody. But there's one song that I really like. It's very sort of dark toned and sort of, musky voiced. And the first whole verse is very sense oriented. We dim the lights, we stoke the fire, we breathe evergreen, right? And the chorus is Emmanuel, God with us. It's very like haunting and very, it's beautiful. And I still love that song. And I thought about this last year. Honestly, I was not thinking about your ornaments at the time, but I was thinking about this for myself last year, that is one of my all-time favorite songs that I still love to listen to during that time of year. And I think that it's partially because, in my mind, clearly not as it was intended as written, it's tying those things together, right? Like that godness in the sense of whatever I still leave space for around sort of an overarching energy, universal energy in all of us, right? That Emmanuel, God with us, means something very different to me now than it did when that was somebody with a name, right? That was a dude that died on a cross, right? That was a specific thing. But honestly, that Emmanuel, God with us concept still resonates with me in the sense of that energy connection that I still feel is entirely strong and happens between people, and tying it to some of those sensory specific things in the verses around holiday pieces. I think that's probably part of what makes that song still really relevant for me and hits Christmas, and why Christmas for me still feels like it's still my favorite time of year. It's still, it's weird sometimes internally in the sense of how I have to navigate it, right? To make sure that I'm being true to myself and to those around me, but I still love it. And I think it's for those connective types of pieces.
I think there's got to be a reason that, and I'm sure this is true for pretty much all religions. I'm obviously just speaking for Christianity here, but that so many of our religious rituals involved food and drink and sensory experiences. The communion, wine and bread, Passover, the use of incense, all these things had a role in the church. I think because whether consciously or subconsciously, people have always understood that our senses allow us to tap into some of those
Really
deeper
deep
parts of who we are.
connections. Yeah. Deep calls to deep. I know that means something entirely different in the Old Testament, but that phrase resonates, right? Like the deep places in you, when you can get together on some type of genuine, common moment. I mean, it's hard to, you can't feel the same things at the same time for any other reason, right? But food you can taste together. Sense, anything sense based and, scent specific drinks, you can take all that in at the same time. And it feels like that connectivity of deep calling to deep of how we're experiencing those moments is the same thing we were trying to achieve for a purpose, right? For a specific, with a religion. In those faith-based moments, right? Communion has to be that. It's an intentional attempt to connect people to a deeper truth, right? At the same time, intentionally doing it together. And I think that it's a powerful, you're right. It may not have been intended for that. Who knows? Through the annals of the religious institution being set up, but I think it's still powerful now for us to work on trying to foster something in us, that energy that I absolutely believe that I don't understand, but absolutely exists, that we hold within ourselves and have the ability to, in some small ways, connect to in each other. I think the places where that fabric feels like it becomes thin are all sensory based. Touch, certainly, we all kind of know that one as a connection place. But I think everything that's sense based. So we are tasting the same things at the same time. We are drinking the same things at the same time. We are, look at my husband and buddies with cigars, right? We're smoking the same flavors at the same time. We're literally connecting in these really thin places in the veil between our energies in some way. And fortunately, I no longer feel like I have to be able to understand it, but that I definitely want to engage in it as often as I can.
Yeah. How does art fill that for you, since you are an artist? How does that fit in?
Yeah, I think that fits much more of a meditative place in me. It's very calming to me. I'm not a high octane person anyway, but life is still filled with noise and music and traffic and the TV and my phone and everything. And I love all those things in their time, but the meditative piece of art, I can't be looking at anything else. So even if I'm listening to something, I'm not visually stimulated by anything but the art pieces that are in my hand. That feeling that I can connect to some part of my own energy within the greater story. I still feel like human history and that energy is something of a stream, right? And all of our energies are connected in that through time. And I don't think anything is ever wasted, as the sonnets say. And so I feel like every act of trying to get some of my own inner personhood out, in that my own energy meditatively out into this other medium, helps me feel connected, maybe to that, you called it community. I'm calling it maybe that energetic stream of humanity, that I feel like I'm a part of it when I do that, even if that piece goes to nobody else. I don't know, but it's definitely, I don't want to call it a religious experience, because it's definitely not, I don't have anything to say that it betters me or that I find a higher calling in it. I only would say that I find it meditative and a good release of my own, whatever that inner energy is that we have, into that common stream. I don't always feel like I get that out. Again, not for anybody else to even see it. I mean, literally to release that into the stream of our human consciousness. I feel the most relaxed then, I think, meditative.
Just about out of time. Any last minute thoughts?
Well, I'm hungry now, I can tell you that. All these thoughts about wine and various foods and Christmas flavors. I would only say, I guess, in all seriousness, I think that these are the conversations I see happening more in my limited space around maybe the younger set. So maybe I'm going to say your age, you young thing, your age and down. I feel like my perception is that it dwindles I don't know. I don't know why. My perception is that that dwindles with age, or that the generation that I am in and those, you know, that are older than me don't maybe put that same emotional connection to those pieces. I think it's happening more and more now. You know, the foodie generation, well, it has a lot of, you know, there's certainly plenty to joke around in that space in the sense of potential snobberies that we were talking about. But I do feel like it also lends itself to more people engaging in that, understanding that maybe it's a little bit deeper. But I don't see that for my age and up. People aren't connecting with me about that as much as I want to connect with them. And I think that that's my lasting thought of having, you know, us having connected on this, is that these are the kinds of conversations I hope we can continue to put out in our little worlds, right? That understanding that this is where the veil is thin, that we're connected on a different level because we are literally breaking bread together.
The veil between the eternal and the ephemeral, whatever you bring to those words, is thinnest when we approach each other with generosity and vulnerability. One of the best ways I've found to do that is over food and drink, and especially by talking through the tasting experience in a holistic and intentional way. Our senses are a physical web that our fluttering memories stick to. They hold fast to moments we might otherwise forget, and the tasting process can bring them back to our attention. If we give and are given the opportunities, we can share those with the unique human beings around the table with us. When we offer our stories, we offer ourselves. I hope you enjoyed this episode of Bean to Barstool. Happy holidays, everyone.